How's it going, everyone? When it comes down to it, we as individuals all have our opinions on things, and video games are one such area of discussion that can get a little divisive at times. Sure, we can get a little on edge at times, and the occasional which brand is better discussion can destroy a friendship or two now and then, but I like to think the internet has only matured us from our barbaric days of the early 80s. Look at them. Nothing but hatred and spite personified, I tell you. But anyway, despite this era of peace in our community today, there are still times that we can feel in the minority in certain topics, and one of those is when a game that we feel ever so about is regarded much more higher praise from other players and critics alike. And today, because I sort of feel like punishing myself, I'm going to be pulling back the curtain to some of those games that just didn't manage to impress me as much as they did with so many others. But before we get into that, however, let's make a few things clear first, just before you decide to take my head off. First of all, let me make it absolutely clear that I do not hate any of these games. Sure, there are things in them that can rub me the wrong way, and I'll try to go into as much detail as possible while still attempting to make this feel not too long for you all, but rest assured, none of them are listed as bad games in my head. Second, this is not an attack on those that really enjoy these games. If there are any particular points made throughout this video that you feel are not much of an issue in your eyes, and perhaps even add towards why you enjoy this game so much, then feel free to let me know in the comment section. And third, despite this list coming out to the point where I feel confident with the amount of games under my belt, to the point the ones you're seeing right now are technically my honourable mentions, it wouldn't seem right not revealing that some of these games here I technically didn't get around to till much later after their initial release. Such reasons being not having the required console to play them on at the time, not being old enough, thank you mum and dad, or sometimes just taking my time getting around to it. I only bring this up because while there may be a few games I didn't play around their release, I at least feel confident in deconstructing them based on what other games were around back then. And with all that said, let us begin. I immediately regret this.
You are a long way from home, cowboy. You have my sympathies.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice.
When it comes to these lists of mine, one group of games you're rarely going to be seeing much of around me are those found in the horror genre. And that's not because I think they're bad in any way, but more down to the simple fact that I can be a bit of a wimp, to say the least. But I'll say this, those few horror games that I have played have shown me a good deal of why people are so attached to this genre, to the point that it is likely that I'll eventually get around to games like Silent Hill 2 or Until Dawn one of these days. But Resident Evil 4 was a game that seemed like a good pick to play early on, just from how much praise it received over the years, which is kind of why it pays me to ask why that is. The thing about Resident Evil 4 is not that there are any major problems sticking out for me, with a few exceptions, but more because there wasn't much to make me go, oh, that's why it's loved so much. While blowing off enemies' heads is very satisfying, it can get a tad repetitive towards the third act. Plus, there were some moments that felt more goofy than scary to me. With that said, sections like with the Nova stores or the Regenerators were actually pretty tense-filled, and many of the bosses did make quite an impression. But sadly, I just didn't have as many memorable moments with this game as I did with the remake for Resident Evil 1. Other than that, the only other complaints I have are with the mixed tones used throughout the story, and when Ashley shows up, which I'm pretty sure I have nothing to add to that people on the internet have not already done themselves. Really though, this pick is not here because it's seen by many as a great game, but more because it's seen as one of the best games. I certainly can't think of any real low points I had during my time with this game, but sadly, there's also not many high points as well.
Light the fires. The valley must be alerted.
Incredible.
Interesting fact, the 2 Minute series is actually one of the oldest gaming memories I had as a child, right next to Crash Bandicoot in SimCity 2000. But other than that, I certainly can't say that since then it's been a series that I've closely followed over the years. That was until the 2013 reboot came along that not only gave us a decently told story that managed to reinvent Lara Croft to be more relatable, but also gave us a well-detailed and slightly open world for us to explore, culminating a rather satisfying experience for many, including myself. So why is it that its sequel just didn't manage to work for me that much? This one really comes down to my overall investment towards everything, and surprisingly my brain just wasn't clicking much throughout this game. There are points in the story that I just sort of forgot what my objective was, and while there were some occasional high points with thrilling set pieces and engaging puzzles, I sadly didn't feel the same spark of adventure that I had with other games of the genre. While the first game was very much a coming of age story, the second one tries to create a theme of family, duty and honour, with Laurel's goal mostly centering on giving her father's life's work meaning, which even with its many flashbacks and campfire narrations just didn't manage to make me sympathise with Lara until her quest was given a little more weight to it. Everything else from the combat to the upgrading is decently done. I can't deny there are some moments that are just simply gorgeous to look at, but sadly while this game doesn't necessarily do anything wrong outside of a slightly flat story, I never felt like it took me on a truly incredible adventure that would last with me for years to come. This next game I'm about to talk about isn't exactly praise to high heaven or anything, but it does have its fans, and one of those happens to be a close personal friend of mine. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that his opinion is why this game is on this list here, but I also can't say that his response after this video is out is not going to be just a tiny bit entertaining. My history with Spyro, like a good handful of other beloved series, is one that didn't exactly follow the ascending path it had been set on, with my first introduction coming from Gateway to Glimmer, or Ripto's Rage outside of Europe, and then on to Year of the Dragon. I remember after completing both of them how I asked my parents if they could find the first one for me so I could have it as a gift for my next birthday, which, the amazing parents that they are, delivered, and while I had a decent time with Spyro the Dragon at first, there were certain design choices from later in the series that I kinda wished had been there from the beginning. For example, while the art direction can be a tad bland at times, I think I would have let it go if they just put a little bit more character into the many levels throughout. Put it this way, I can list a ton of memorable levels from Year of the Dragon, and even more from Gateway to Glimmer, but even after just replaying Spyro the Dragon a while back, I mostly just see a vague blur of it in my head to the point that I can just kinda make out certain parts. Even back then, the young age that I was, I found a lot of things to be rather too simple for me, whether it be the plot, the boss fights, or even some of the platforming. As harsh as this comment might seem, Spyro the Dragon feels like it just manages to avoid being grouped up with some of the more infamous 3D platformers. What very much saves it for me are things like the unique soundtrack used throughout, which still kicks ass to this day, tidbits later on like using the supercharge, and what effort was done in giving the enemies a bit of personality. I know it seems a little harsh me having already played the more story driven and less surreal sequels, but I have a feeling that even if I had played Spyro the Dragon first, I can't say that I would have been won over, unlike, you know, some others I know of. Wink wink. Oh, I don't think he's going to be replying to my messages anytime soon. The phrase style over substance may be one that we equate with film mostly, but it can be found in quite a variety of games available today, with many talented developers having found unique ways to integrate their artistic vision with different gameplay elements. However, sometimes you sort of have to separate the two to realise that one of them isn't in beat as much as they should be.
Jet Set Radio!
Even though I never ended up getting a Dreamcast in its rather short lifespan, there was still a good handful of games that seemed interesting, and I think it's safe to say there are a few out there who were eager to get their hands on Jet Set Radio purely for its stunningly colourful art direction alone. And while I myself can admit there is something just so appealing about this game at face first value, it's when I start playing it that makes me wish the gameplay had a bit more put into it. My big complaint with this one is pretty straightforward, it just doesn't control well for me. Movement feels way too sluggish, pulling off combos can feel near impossible at times, and when it comes to trying to land jumps at the precise distance and angle required, this game can really bring out a much darker side of me. I'll give the game this though, I love how absurd it can get at times, especially when it comes to the lengths law enforcement will take to stop you. Plus the soundtrack fits in really well with the game's colourful aesthetic, though it can get a little repetitive when constantly failing missions. Speaking of which, while the missions aren't that much of a problem when compared to my issues with the controls, I do wish they were a little better structured, as they tend to shift from decently easy to almost finger-breakingly painful. On the whole, this game is still very charming to me, I just wish it didn't feel like I was constantly face-planting all the time. So basically what I'm like in real life when it comes to extreme sports. Ugh, maybe this game is more realistic than I give it credit for.
It is a good life we lead, brother.
The best. May it never change.
And may it never change us.
While on this list I've mostly talked about individual games, I sadly can't really sugarcoat how my issues with the many games from Assassin's Creed mostly stem from the series as a whole, rather than any game in particular. Which is a real shame, as even I'm surprised I don't enjoy these games more. But even after 10 years now, and having played at least 6 games under the franchise in that time, I honestly don't know if I'll ever be won over at this point. However, seeing as I can't really pick the entire series, I decided it only seemed right that I go with one of the 2 most beloved games in the series, that being Assassin's Creed 2 or Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. And seeing as as I admittedly had a lot of fun with Black Flag ship battles, Assassin's Creed 2 was our winner of sorts. Now I know that much of why this game was praised was most due to how lackluster Assassin's Creed 1 was to people, but even though we got things like a proper story this time around, I still feel like much of the awkward gameplay from before had still remained pretty much unchanged. Sure, the climbing had been sped up a bit, we got a few new ways to kill people, and we finally learned how to swim, but there are still too many moments in which the game ends up screwing me over in some way, whether it be climbing up the wrong wall, not landing on spaces properly, or just missing a damn haystack. I can admit that not all of them may be the game's fault and more down to my patience with the game, but it just feels like my annoyance with this game just builds up like some rage-filled snowball. The story of Ezio's quest for revenge is also one that starts out fairly interesting, but it just starts to feel repetitive about halfway through. Ezio needs to kill some high-ranking target, he gets help from some random historic figure from the time, he completes a few tasks for them, and then finally kills his target with usually only one preferred method available. The recreation of each Italian city is, for the most part, really well done, and I never felt like there was something out of place with them. That is, until the seams of the anima start to break away. The show has become a staple of the series since the beginning, but every time it happens, it just breaks the illusion by reminding me that I'm just playing a video game. On the nice side of things, I do have to give credit to Roger Craig Smith's performance as Ezio, particularly how he does a pretty decent job of gradually evolving from cocky, carefree youth to middle-aged master assassin. To me, this game, and to some extent this whole series, manages well to engage me in a culturally significant period of history, but fails at giving me much to care for, whether it be story or gameplay related. I just wish his blade was just a little bit sharper is all.
War never changes.
I'll be honest with you all, if this list was made roughly 7 years ago, you probably wouldn't be seeing Fallout New Vegas on here. Not because I had any high praise for the game back then, but more due to the fact of how surprised I am nowadays about hearing how it's suddenly this great RPG, to the point that many even feel it trumps its predecessor Fallout 3. Which, admittedly, is kind of why it's here now. And again, not to judge you if you do happen to feel that way, it's just that there are sadly a few creative decisions made in New Vegas that don't really work out with me. The biggest hindrance when comparing the two games for me is with the open world design and structure. The way the world is laid out in Fallout 3 just feels so much more inviting in my opinion, and a big part of that is due to how explorative they make everything feel. Sure, there are parts where you can get your ass handed to you if you're not careful, and there are plenty of parts in the capital that require you to journey through tube stations and all, but one thing is for sure is that I never felt held back during my time with it. That's sadly not the case with New Vegas for me. That at first seems like it's going to let you off the toddler harness, but instead just ends up making me feel more restricted with how it wants you to progress in those first few hours of the game. Whether it be blocking of access with super tough enemies, or with the rocky terrain, which, yes, while in keeping with the geography of the actual Mojave Desert, still gets in the way. So I'm not a fan of how this game starts out like, but surely I got over it after a few levels gained, along with some decent gear salvaged. Well, that would be the case if it still didn't feel like this world was providing me with such little enthusiasm to uncover its secrets. I guess if the main and side quests were more interesting, my issues with the map design could sort of be overlooked, but even they failed to get me invested at times. Sure, there are ones that can end with you having to make a very morally defined decision, which would usually end in you gaining or losing favour with individual communities, but I sadly can't pick but a few that really stood out to me. For all that said, I will admit there are certain things I feel got a much better treatment here than with Fallout 3, whether it be the companions you can come across or the much more satisfying endings. But sadly though, even after all these years, I can't say the scales have really tipped much anyway as to what is my preferred post-apocalyptic experience. Let me make this clear, out of all the games on this list, this is the one that I find to be the most frustrating to talk about. And it's not because I have any raw dislike towards it, but rather, I just find it so frustrating to put my feelings about it into words. Bayonetta, and to be honest, many of Platinum Games' other past titles, have certainly taken a more, how should I say, laid-back approach compared to some of the more super serious games we get nowadays. And while I have my own set of over-top games I like to stick in now and then, most of Platinum Games' games seem to have a very overly sour taste when I play them. Out of the ones I have played, Bayonetta is kind of the hardest for me to swallow. After thinking about it for a while, I've come to realise much of it what it comes down to is its choice of tone for me. It feels like it's trying to be one big smart joke, sort of like Starship Troopers or Robocop, and yet the game tries to push these serious scenes that just don't fit in with the rest of the game. If you can't get me invested in the world, but you also can't get me to not give a shit and enjoy the ride, then I consider that a huge fail in my book. Another area that also left little room for me to care is with Bayonetta herself. I won't deny that her design is certainly one that sticks with you, but honestly now, I kind of find it to be boring. Her carefree attitude and lack of focus may be appealing to some, but to me it just comes off as tiresome. It was only until Sarissa became a part of things that allowed me to grow the tiniest bit of attachment, but other than that I felt so little motivation to see how Bayonetta's story would turn out in the end. There are other story related things I could go into, but I should talk about what almost everyone comes for, that being the smooth, flashy combat. Maybe it's just that I'm not especially great at any particular hack and slash games, but I found my feelings for the gameplay to be on roughly the same level as every other game from the genre. Again, I don't fully understand why this game isn't the same needle of adrenaline like it is with so many other players I hear about, and to be honest, I do sort of want to check out its sequels one of these days just to see if anything can possibly sway me over, but for now, this series and this character just simply fails at turning me on.
Well, that's it then. Bring the ship back up to Combat Alert Alpha. I want everyone at their stations.
Everyone, sir?
Everyone. And Cortana. Let's give our old friends a warm welcome.
I've already begun.
The Halo series is certainly a mixed bag of emotions for me. At times it can be one of the best shooter franchises out there, and at other times it can feel a little slow and uninteresting. Being another franchise that I ended up catching a little late after its big debut, it actually really managed to grab me with excellent titles like Halo 3 and Halo Reach. However, when the time came for me to eventually experience for myself where it all began, I was a little underwhelmed. The first thing that got to me was, despite me having already played as Master Chief before, I was surprised at how disconnected I felt as him throughout the entire game, and a big part of that comes from what we are fighting for. I have to say, if the only real look at humankind is with either the emotionless superhuman or the many expendable marines, then why should I care about trying to save an Earth I haven't even seen yet? And yes, I know it's odd me complaining about this despite me already having played later titles that I feel do give me reason to care, but that was then and this is now. Or rather, that is now and this is then, but then again they're both past games. The combat for me just felt way too dry compared to other shooters I've played, particularly due to the limited weapons and enemies, but mostly just from the game's level design, both in its often confusing layout and its repetitive use of assets. As for the multiplayer here, I have no opinion of it. Yeah, despite me having the anniversary copy of the game, I never thought to really play the multiplayer side of the game, which is a little hard for me to do now, seeing as I cancelled my Xbox Live Gold membership a few years ago. Still though, considering my past experience with the Halo multiplayer beforehand, I think I would have really enjoyed it, and that's not just me trying to cover my ass. While this game does have its share of problems in my opinion, it was able to create a rich and unique atmosphere that is still recognisable to this day. But while this may have been an epic start to one of gaming's most popular franchises to some, to me it was just a start. Nothing more, nothing less. My runner-up pick is not just a game that is well regarded in the gaming community, but it's actually one that I find to be people's favourite game of all time. So... Like Halo, the Mass Effect series is one that really managed to grab me when I was first introduced to it, but as I started to play more from the series, my attention waned quite a bit. Unlike Halo, however, the Mass Effect series is one that I managed to catch right when it began, but when the Better in Every Way sequel came along, I was sad to see that BioWare touch I first fell in love with Knights of the Republic very much absent this time. For starters, let's kick off with the story. It's repetitive, predictable, as well as repetitive. When the whole collecting team member aspect was marketed, I actually got pretty hyped for it, until I found out that roughly 75% of the game was dedicated to just recruiting and pleasing team members. Look, I love picking up extra team members in RPGs, but I also like it when they A. surprise me with their introduction, B. shift the gameplay in a way that other team members can't, and C. actually feel like they have a huge impact on the overall story. I'll admit, Mass Effect 1's story wasn't incredible, but at least managed to surprise me often, and the fact that each storyline wasn't here for just a few minutes meant that they were able to build a more realised atmosphere each time and provide a much more memorable experience. I also sadly didn't feel as connected to the majority of the crew as others have, mostly due to a lot of them seeming either bland or just not very relatable. With that said, I did end up forming more of a bond with my new crew members when they reappeared in Mass Effect 3, so take that for what it's worth, I guess. Another thing that I felt became a bit of a personal annoyance for me was how many of the characters acted towards Shepard now, with them almost on the verge of just straight up calling him Space Jesus. I know it's more of a response from our deeds from the last game than just coming back from the dead, but personally I just feel like no one would really question my decision cutscenes at times. One other odd complaint, which annoyingly yes had to do with how things were done last time around, is with the use of lighting. While I'm aware the softer lighting in the first game was mostly due to technical limitations rather than any creative decisions, I still prefer it to the much more flashy style we get stuck with this time around. As for the combat, it's alright. I can't honestly say there was any particular gripes in that department, and there was some fun to be had with flinging enemies off the sides. I know it seems like I'm being a little picky due to my experience with the first game, but to me the first one was an epic adventure that allowed me to discover a deep and unique universe, while the sequel just brought it down for me. I will say this though, I am legitimately surprised at how many times I've played this game all the way to the end. Is it because I think something might be different each time, or that I'm still trying to figure out what I'm missing from it? Who knows. For a while now, I've been debating as to whether my number one pick deserves to be on this list, seeing as how there are more people who share my opinion with it than with say games like Mass Effect 2 or Halo. But the thing is, this list is about games that I just don't understand people's enjoyment of. And so, it only seemed right that this be my number one pick. Wait. Oh, no. This isn't right. I mean, while there are certain aspects to Ocarina of Time that haven't aged well in my opinion, and its title of Best Game of All Time is one I'm hesitant to award it to, but I can at least understand why so many fell in love with it. Despite me not getting around to it many years after its release, I can still see the entertainment value found in its story, its gameplay, and its world. My real number one pick, however, not so much. Okay then, so I think I might know what some of you might be saying right now. What the hell, man? Everyone knows that Skyward Sword is considered to be one of the most divisive games in Legend of Zelda series. Why the hell would this be at the top of your list, you moron? Well, while it is correct that there are many who don't look too fondly on this entry to the long-running Legend of Zelda series, some to quite a high degree, that doesn't draw away from the fact that there was quite some critical praise behind this game when it first came out that I can only express with the sound. So let's go right to the things that I do like this game, because there are sure a few negatives that I'm going to be treading through in a bit. I appreciate the fact this is really the first time we've seen a romantic bond form between Link and Zelda, and while it's nothing really special, it did do a good job relying mostly on their facial expressions, seeing as how one of them still can't mostly talk. We finally got a water dungeon that did make me want to pull my hair out for the first time, and it actually turned out to be one of the best segments in the entire game. The music has some nice tracks now and then, and I can't say I had any particular problems with the flying at all. Was kinda hoping there'd possibly be more. Anyway, the bad stuff now. I've come to realise that fans of this game don't take kindly when calling out the motion controls as being broken, so I'll avoid using terms like that. I will however say that they are extremely annoying. Waving a sword around and cutting up stuff is cool at first, but it just never made me feel like I was engaging in intense battle, and instead just led to incredibly frustrating moments for me. The gadgets aren't any better, with some working out okay, while others are just slow and or difficult to use. While the story is alright, the pacing feels flat and will even send you off on errands that feel entirely pointless. I mean, it's bad enough they send you all the way back to the already completed first dungeon, but then they have you fly all the way from Eldin to Farron Woods just to retrieve a basin of water, only to fly all the way back and then be told that you have to escort the basin back up to the top of the mountain. This is more than just being incompetent, this is just straight up lazy. I know that we usually have these padded out moments included in almost every Zelda game, whether either Triforce Shards in Wind Waker or restoring the Dominion Rod's power in Twilight Princess, but they were mostly one-time things, while Skyward Sword feels like they pop up almost every hour or so. There are a few things I could go into, but let's address the angel of death to my sanity, that is Fee. Where do I even begin? She has the most annoying voice and dialogue I have ever come across in a video game. She gives out the most obvious advice, making it feel like Nintendo was intending for 5-year-olds to be the target audience for this game. Her uses start and end with her just being used as a metal detector. And what's more, the tiny bit of development we see out of her is right at the very end, when she finally stops referring to us as Master and instead calls us by our actual name. To put it bluntly, this game is one hell of a struggle for me, and just looking at the multiple perfect ratings it got, just leaves me in complete utter confusion. And yet, despite my many grievances, I still can't hate this game. Despite what many of you might think, this video was not made so I could vent out my issues with these games, but rather so you could have the opportunity to let me know why they are so special to you. I'm honestly really interested to hear your experiences with them and why they are so special in your eyes. I'm a very open person, and I honestly like to know why, because sometimes you've just got to hear another person's opinion to really get it. So, If you are out there, and if there was a game here that you feel that you really enjoyed, then feel free to let me know in the comments below, because I'm quite interested, honestly. Or, you know, possibly share out one of your own games that you're so on. Just know what you're stepping into, okay? So thank you all for tuning in. If you haven't liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for even more hot cost goodness. Or you can check me out on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks again, guys, and hey, be seeing you around.